An NDP leader nobody thought could win. After all, it had never happened before and was unimaginable. But the unimaginable happened, and the NDP won a majority government. Rachel Notley and Alberta in 2015? Yes, of course, but those facts were also on display 25 years ago in Ontario, when a 42-year-old NDP leader named Bob Rae shocked the country by winning a majority government. Who better then to analyze what the Alberta NDP have to do and be wary of than Ontario's 21st Premier? And so we welcome Bob Rae back to TVO. It's nice to see you again.
Good to be with you, Steve.
Well, lots of people have observed that the similarities are quite incredible. Do you see them as well?
You know, I think there's some interesting ones. I mean, there was an early election call in the middle of a changing economic situation, to put it mildly. And I think a person who called the call, the Premier of the day, trying, I think, to get in under the radar of the economic transformation that was happening, and the public in a very volatile, and in some cases, angry mood, wanting to send a message, and then finding that momentum leads to the result that perhaps at the beginning nobody entirely expected.
You at least had, I think, 17 or 18 MPPs in 1990 who did have previous experience in the legislature, so that is sort of, it's a bit of a foundation from which to build a cabinet. She has four. She has four MPPs who have experience. What does she need to think about in terms of building a cabinet then?
Well, I think that we faced three big challenges all at the same time. One was a new government with new people, and all that involves. An economic crisis, which I think, without any question, was probably more severe than what Alberta has been going through, and a constitutional crisis. People sometimes forget that. We're talking today that Mr. Couillard is in Ontario. We were facing in the middle of a major constitutional mess at the time I took office.
Constitutional Court.
It collapsed, and support for separatism was at 60% in Quebec, and it was a huge. That was another sort of huge preoccupation. Those are three big challenges. She faces the first one is getting her government going and getting the cabinet moving. I think it's a matter of finding the right people.
She had the right people.
Maybe combining some portfolios at the beginning, giving people with more experience a chance to kind of get things going, keep the cabinet relatively small, and then give the other people in the backbench a chance to kind of get to know the place, and also for her to get to know them. The hardest part is not so much that everybody's new, it's that I'd be very surprised if she was really deeply knowledgeable about the talents and weaknesses of all the people that were elected. And that's the hard part, is just not knowing, what is that talent pool like. And when you think about it, choosing a head of a department without really knowing, how good they are or whether they can actually do it is tough. And that's why I think the advice to sort of try to keep it relatively small at the beginning is a good idea. You've got the advantage that the newly elected MLAs will not be, necessarily anticipating that they're going to get a call from the Premier, as opposed to when you're an established government, everybody thinks they should be, deputy prime minister.
But how blunt does she have to be in the early going, saying to these new cabinet ministers, look, within a few months the knives are going to be out for us. You guys just can't screw up. I know you're all newbies, but you can't screw up, or it's going to just send us right down the you-know-what. Does she give that speech in caucus or in cabinet?
I don't think you give it in that way, because I think what you say to people is, look, we are under constant scrutiny. And when you say within a few months the knives are going to be out, you're wrong. Within a few days, in the current political setup, in the way in which partisanship has taken over and eaten away at the fabric of a lot of civility, the opposition parties and whoever decides to oppose themselves to the government outside the legislature is not going to be waiting for a long time. They're going to give the Premier a chance, yes, but don't think that people aren't, ready to try to undermine and to keep the partisan game going. And that will be true in Alberta as anywhere else. It's like learning how to play the violin in public. It's all very well to say don't make mistakes, but we all make mistakes. Everybody makes mistakes. I think the one thing you have to say to people is you expect ministers to conduct themselves in an appropriate way. You expect them to live up to their calling as ministers and to do the best they can. And then you have to spend a lot of time with your own staff and with people that you trust in working with ministers. You don't just throw them at the end of the pool and say, let's see who gets to the other end. You've got to work together as a team all the way through and help the people who are having some challenges.
Okay, another comparison though. By 1990, you had been in politics for 12 years. You'd been in the Ontario legislature for 8. She's been the leader since October. Does she have the experience to call upon herself to do what you just suggested?
Well, like I said, you develop those skills pretty quickly. Either you do or you don't.
Or you don't, right.
And you just see what happens. But I think everybody who saw her in the campaign would have to say she's got a pretty cool head on her shoulders.
Do you know her at all?
Not very. No, I don't really know her. No.
Have you met her?
No, I don't think so. Huh. I knew her father. Her father was leader of the Alberta Party when I was leader of the Ontario Party. I was at his funeral. He died in a terrible plane crash in northern Alberta. But I don't think I know her.
Okay, one more thing on this issue of cabinet making, and that is Leslie Frost, former Premier of Ontario, was Treasurer at the same time.
Right.
John Robarts, for a time, was his own Education Minister and Premier at the same time. Kathleen Wynne was her own Agriculture Minister and Premier at the same time. Is that something she should do?
I don't recommend it. The only portfolio that I think both David Peterson and I took, and I think Premier Davis did as well, was intergovernmental affairs. And I did it because of the way the Constitution was just there on our plates as an issue. So I kind of took that on. I think that if you do that, you do it at a risk. I mean, first of all, you need other people in the government to take on the management board and treasury board functions. You need to have allies in the government who are going to be dealing with the financial issues that you're facing and taking them on. You can't do that by yourself. And if you take on another portfolio, then that portfolio only is going to get short shrift in the end. You're not going to be able to focus your time and attention on it. Kathleen Wynne is not the Minister of Agriculture now. That's not an accident. Mm-hmm. She's eventually discovered that this wasn't going to be the perfect solution. She wanted to send a message, and she did. And then she said, "Okay, now that's done. Let's move on to the next thing." So no, I don't recommend that.
Okay, let me ask about the civil service. The civil service in Alberta for 4.5 decades has only worked for one political party. Should the incoming Premier of Alberta be suspicious that because of that, they won't help implement her agenda?
I don't know. I don't think suspicious is the right word. I think you have to take things on their face. I think you look at who's there. There are some very talented people. I mean, Richard Discerny was just brought in, for example, by Mr. Prentice to be the head of the civils, to sort of run the government for him.
Brought out of retirement.
And Richard is a great guy. He worked federally. We brought him in Ontario. He survived the transition to Mr. Harris. A lot of people didn't. He did. And served that government, and then has moved into OPG, and then back up to the federal government. He's a very talented guy. I would strongly urge anyone to say, let him, if he wants to stay, let him do his job. He's got a lot to offer. I'm sure that's true of a lot of other people in Alberta. Alberta's had a talented public service for a long time, not overly partisan necessarily, quite progressive in many respects. She's going to need some people to look more broadly at the talent pool in the whole country. It's a challenge. I'm not one of those people who believes that you have to you start out polishing shoes and then you work your way up to deputy minister and that's the way it should be and there's no change. I do think you have to look laterally. You have to look across the private sector and in NGOs and elsewhere. I think you have to be very careful not to overly partisanize the public service. That creates all kinds of morale issues.
You did do that yourself,
No, I don't think so.
You appointed your campaign manager the head of the civil service.
That was a decision taken with great thought and with great care after 2.5 years. He's now the president of Seneca College. I don't think anybody would say he wasn't qualified.
No one was alleging he wasn't qualified. Talking about David Agnew. No one's saying he wasn't qualified, but I'm just pushing back a little bit on the advice you're giving out west. Anyway, let's try about this. Two schools of thought here. She should hit the ground running, make some fast decisions, show action, I'm in charge, yada, yada, yada. Or take it easy, go slow, don't make any dumb mistakes out of the gate. What would you recommend?
Well, obviously, don't make. I mean, the advice that you're giving, don't make any dumb mistakes out of the gate, is always good advice. I think the key thing is that you have to combine the two things. One is to consult and discuss, and say you want to hear from people, and the other thing is clearly she's going to have to take some steps. I mean, just to give you an example, I don't know exactly what is the financial situation in the province. What is the state of the province's finances exactly? And you say, well, it's in Prentice's budget. I say, no, it's not, because Mr. Prentice's budget was, first of all, prepared just before an election. Secondly, a lot of what governments put in their budgets on spending is hope. We hope to limit healthcare spending to this much. We hope to be able to control this much. We hope to be able to find internal in-year savings here. That process won't even have started. So she's got to know what is the actual situation and what is the actual, if we don't do anything, what will happen? You know, where will we be in 6 months and where will we be in a year? That's on the spending side. On the revenue side, you don't really know either, because it depends on how much has the economy actually slowed and how much is it still slowing. Have we hit bottom yet? Are we starting to see any signs of recovery? Oil prices are up $10. Okay, but if the budget anticipated that they would hit 80 and not just 60, then what's her revenue situation? And that's the kind of thing she has to be looking at very, very carefully. And the other thing is, I think most political advisors would say, if you're going to make some difficult decisions, then make them and don't wait.
She's got a majority after all.
She's got a majority, but she has to convince her caucus on the need to make difficult decisions. The hard part for the New Democrats will be that they come in with huge expectations. And they have their own expectations of what they'd like the government to do, the kinds of projects they'd like to get going on. She's taking office at a time when you don't have the luxury of making those kinds of decisions. She may have to make very difficult ones that, in fact, she didn't think when she was running that she would like or have to make. But she may end up having to make them.
So let's try this. And again, looking back at history, I think it was 43 years ago that Dave Barrett in British Columbia won a surprise victory for the NDP, one-term government and out. Yours was a similar situation. 1990 surprise victory, one term and out. 6 years ago, Darrell Dexter in Nova Scotia, NDP, one-term victory and out. What does Rachel Notley have to do to make sure that historical trend doesn't befall her?
Well, I mean, it's interesting you would choose those comparators, but in fact, the comparators that I think she'll be looking for is more likely to be talking to people in Saskatchewan and more likely to be talking to people in Manitoba. In both Manitoba and Saskatchewan, the party, the New Democratic Party, has been able to establish the habit of governing, the discipline of governing. And those habits and those disciplines are critical. And in Manitoba, although the party's in difficulty now, the government's been there for 4 terms. In Saskatchewan, the party's now out of office, but they had a habit of governing under Premier Douglas and Premier Blakeney and Premier Romano, and have a very strong sense of what do you have to do to do it, to get it done. And I think those are the places that she should be looking to and talking to, and those are the traditions she needs to be thinking about. And frankly, I'm sure she is. You know, I think that's exactly what she should do, as well as learn from the difficulties, challenges, you know, mistakes of others, and say, well, this is what we did, and this worked and this didn't work. And eventually, you have to find your own way. She has to find her own path. That's exactly what she'll do.
Roy Romano, she has called. He is apparently part of the transition team and will be offering advice. You're good pals with him. Has she called you?
No.
Would you expect to get a call?
No.
Now, I know you're in a different party now, but I mean, the reality is you've been through all of this before.
Yeah.
You presumably have something to share on this.
I'm happy to. And I've certainly sent her a message saying, you know, good luck and all good wishes and very impressive campaign. And I feel that very strongly. At a personal level, I feel that very strongly. I'm just not expecting it. I mean, I understand, you know, look, all the good things that I did as Premier, I'm very proud of them. Government, I'm prepared to defend its record. I can talk about, you know, transit. I can talk about housing. I can talk about the stuff that we did as a government that I'm very, very proud of. the fact is that she may decide, well, like, you know, I just don't want to get into that game, and I don't want to have a now person who's a liberal who was a New Democrat and blah blah. And that's fine. I mean, I got lots on my plate. I mean, so I'm not unhappy. And certainly Roy Romano knows me very well, and he has a very keen and practical sense of what needs to be done. Absolutely.
Let's finish on this. Of course, lots of people who are looking nationally now want to know whether this election result means anything in terms of the federal election in October. What's your thought on that?
I think it means that there's opening, and I think it means that there's volatility. I don't necessarily draw a quick partisan conclusion to say this is fantastic for the NDP and terrible for the Liberals and terrible for the Conservatives. I actually don't think that's true. I'm trying to look at this in as realistic a way. Of course, it's better news for the New Democrats in the sense of, yeah, I mean, look, that's good. But on the other hand, you've got to say it's not bad news for Mr. Trudeau, and it's not necessarily bad news for Mr. Harper. Look at the numbers. Wildrose and Progressive Conservatives together, well over a majority of the population in Alberta. His base is not deeply threatened. For Mr. Trudeau, a new, attractive leader, connects with the public and makes a breakthrough victory. Not a bad formula for him. So I think there's a lot of opening there for all three parties that they should be looking. And the one big message, and it's as much a message for your profession as it is for my old profession, and that is don't take the public for granted and don't assume anything with respect to where polls are at the beginning of a campaign or how opinion can change. Public opinion changes.
Campaigns matter.
Campaigns matter.
Yeah. Mr. Rae, always good to see you here at TVO. Thanks for coming in and helping us out with this. Bob Rae, Ontario's 21st Premier.
Help TVO create a better world through the power of learning. Visit supporttvo.org and make a tax-deductible donation today.